Hello, welcome to the fourth week of our tricycle online retreat, Working and Playing with the Breath. The first 3 weeks we discussed topics of working and playing with the breath in the doing of concentration and in the maintaining of concentration. This last week is going to be devoted to putting those skills to use. Now there are various ways we've already been discussing how you can use these skills. In the course of sitting in meditation, the skills of working and playing with the breath are useful for dealing with distraction, dealing with pain, dealing with lots of issues that come up in the mind that would interfere with the concentration itself. As you maintain concentration as you go throughout the day, this can be useful in dealing with negative people, negative energies around you. Also learning how to maintain a sense of balance as you deal with difficult issues in the course of the day. Here we'd like to focus more specifically on some of the issues that come up with problems in the mind itself. I'd like to focus this week on 2 problems in particular. One is when you're facing difficult decisions, and the other is when you're dealing with difficult emotions. In making difficult decisions, concentration is very helpful because it helps you come from a better place when you make the decision. A useful technique when you're meditating is if you know that there's some issue that you've got to make a decision on and you're not sure of how you're going to deal with it, you pose the question in mind. And then you try to formulate that question as well as you can, and then you put it aside. Sit down, meditate, and wait until the end of the session, and then allow the issue to come back up again. Now, there's no guarantee that you will get an immediate answer, or if you think through it, that you'll get absolutely the right answer to the question. But you're coming from a better place. Physically, you're coming from a better place in the sense that you've allowed the breath to give you a sense of nourishment. All too often we make our worst decisions based on hunger. We're really hungry for something. And when you can take care of the hunger, you realize that it wasn't really that important at all, or that was not the skillful approach. So you're taking care of this sense of I need an immediate fix of pleasure in order to satisfy myself. If you can take care of that sense of hunger right away, you're in a much better position to make skillful choices and skillful decisions. Another area where you might want to use the same technique is if you know that you're going to be facing a difficult situation. People who know how to push your buttons, situations where you've been before and you've gotten into arguments that were really useless and that you regretted afterwards. One of the most underused aspects of meditation is part of right effort, which deals with learning how to prevent unskillful things from happening. And so again, you think about the situation that you're focusing, put it aside, settle down, work with the breath, and then when you come up out of the concentration, try to focus on how you would say something and what the other person would say in response. And again, you're coming from a better place as you're thinking about this, and you can plan an approach that you know or that you would suspect would work better. You think about the approaches you've tried in the past and haven't worked. And the fact that you're coming from a better place makes it easier to admit, okay, you may have done something unskillful yourself, and this is time to change your policies. So that's one of the issues in which you can use the process of working and playing with the breath to help with problems in the mind. The other is when you're dealing with difficult emotions. And here again, the image of the committee is very useful. When an emotion comes up strongly, it doesn't mean it's necessarily something you really believe. Remember, as the Buddha said, these things are fabricated, they're put together, and they're just as false as anything else that comes up in the mind. And even the fact that they're strong means simply that they've hijacked the breath, and that they've been able to use that as an argument for pushing their way into the mind. So when you find that a very strong emotion has come up, you can sit down with it and breathe calmly first, and that helps to get the breath on your side as opposed to being on the side of the unskillful emotion. And then you can look at how you've been fabricating this emotion. What are the verbal fabrications you've been putting into it? What are the mental fabrications? The verbal fabrications, of course, have to do with the narrative that you've been telling yourself. And you learn to question the narrative. And then mental fabrications are the feelings of comfort or discomfort you feel around it. If you've been working well with the breath, that you've replaced the discomfort of the emotion with a greater sense of comfort, so that tends to undercut that problem. And then you can look at some of the underlying perceptions. Sometimes you find that when you clear away the current narrative, there'll be a perception that goes deeper down into, perhaps in your childhood. You also might think of going deeper down into your lizard brain, the part of you that has these images that flash and send their subliminal messages up to you. By getting the narrative out of the way, it's easier to see those images and to realize that you can replace them. Now sometimes people say that when you take away the narrative, you get to these basic images or these basic feelings, and that's your real feeling and that's your genuine feeling. Remember, again, the feeling is fabricated. And if it's unskillful, why do you want to continue fabricating it? You've been doing this habitually, you can change your habits. So you learn to replace that one image with another image. Say, for instance, that you have a sense of very strong, justified anger about something that someone has done. The Buddha recommends that you stop and consider the fact that you are like a person who is hot, tired, going through the desert, trembling with thirst. You need water. You see a cow's footprint, and there's a little bit of water in the cow's footprint. Now, you know if you bent down to scoop it up, you'd muddy the water. So what do? You get down and you slurp the water up directly from the cow's footprint. Now, if someone were to come along and take a picture of you doing this, it wouldn't be that dignified. But what you're doing there is you realize that you have to focus very carefully on that person's goodness. What are the good things that that person has said? What are the good things that that person has done, so that you don't paint the person as a totally evil person? Because you need that person's goodness to nourish your own. If you feel that the whole world is nothing but evil people, you don't have the same energy to put into being a good person yourself. You say, I can mistreat them. They're mistreating one another all the time, so it doesn't really make any difference if I'm mistreating them. That's an unskillful way of thinking. Your own goodness dies. So you've got to learn how to focus on their goodness. So the image that you're holding in mind is not so much that you've been victimized by that person, or that you're a helpless little child, or whatever other image you're holding in mind. Hold in mind the image. You need the water of their goodness. Otherwise, if you see the whole world is a bunch of son of a bitches, it's like that cartoon in The New Yorker, where two lady poodles are sitting at a bar, and they both have a very mean expression on their faces, and one of them saying they're all sons of bitches. Like if everybody is a son of a bitch, what does that make you, So you don't want to be that kind of person. So this helps, giving yourself this image, giving yourself this mental fabrication, helps you start taking apart all these various committee members, because you learn how to see how fabricated they are. And just because you feel an emotion strongly doesn't mean it is your genuine emotion, or it's something that you really feel. It's something that you've been habitually acting this way. Because it's a type of action, because it's a type of fabrication, you can learn how to undo it. And by working with the breath gives you a tool for stepping back and feeling that you don't have to get whatever satisfaction you got out of that particular emotion before. Because what you're trying to do is basically see how you've been feeding on it and why it's an unhealthy way of feeding. In fact, this is one of the most useful set of questions that you can ask. Once you've breathed through an emotion, you're able to look at it more objectively. The first question is, okay, why am I feeding on this particular emotion? There's stress in there. What am I getting out of this? What's the pleasure I find here? Working with the breath helps you not only ask this question, but also be ready for the answer when it comes, because many times the answers when they come are things you're not going to want to know about yourself. Your unskillful motivations, your unskillful ways of looking at the world, your unskillful expectations about what you want out of the world. Having worked with the breath and developing a sense of well-being, you're in a much better mood to admit to yourself, oh yes, I do act in that way, I do react in that way. And I don't really want to do that anymore, and I don't have to do it anymore. So, why are you feeding on this? It's related to, why are you letting it eat at you? It's because you've been feeding on it. So you want to look at how you've been feeding on it. And as I said, working with the breath helps put you in a better position to ask that question and also be ready for the answer when it comes, and also to use the answer in a skillful way as a mature adult, because working with these forms of fabrication, you're becoming more knowledgeable about how you fabricate your experience, and you learn how to do it in a more mature and helpful way. Some people sometimes ask, what you're doing here is basically kind of an insight practice. At what point in the practice are your powers of concentration ready for this? And there are basically two rules of thumb. One is, if it's an issue that you can put aside for the time being in order to further develop your powers of concentration, learn how to put it aside. You want to learn how to look at these emotions as they come up and not try to complete the story or complete the emotion before you put it aside. Let it stay unfinished. Go back to your powers of concentration. Go back to the breath, because you need to have that as your retreat mode, because sometimes some of these issues get very difficult and you find yourself, as you're trying to analyze them, instead of you're understanding them, you're actually getting more entangled. So you want to learn how to cut the entanglements and go right back to the breath. So it's an important skill to develop. However, if the issue is something you really got an answer right away, you use whatever powers of concentration, use whatever powers of discernment you have right now. It's like asking the question, how strong do you have to be to go down at the gym? Well, You might be embarrassed to go down in the gym because you're weak and small and everybody else is big, but that doesn't really help you at all. You realize, okay, I start out with the small weights. I use whatever strength I have, and now I develop more strength. And so the same with whatever concentration you have, whatever discernment you have, you learn how to use what you've got, and in the course of using it, you learn how to strengthen it. So there's no clear line that you're doing either concentration practice or insight practice. In fact, as you're working with the breath, you're developing both qualities at the same time. And the Buddha himself talked about breath meditation in these terms. He says you work on understanding things as processes of fabrication, bodily fabrication and mental fabrication, verbal fabrication. And you learn how to calm those processes. And seeing these things as fabrication, learning how to calm them, you're developing both calm and insight at the same time. So these are a couple of the ways in which you can use the process of working and playing with the breath and the skills that you develop while working and playing with the breath to deal with issues in the mind. And dealing with emotions is not simply a question of, I've got to get this emotion out of my way so I can live the rest of my life. As you look into the emotions, you begin to see how greed, aversion, and delusion are driving your life in ways that you don't want them to. All too often, a thought comes by, and it's like a person coming up in a car and saying, jump in, and our past ways of dealing with it, we would jump right in. Sometimes they don't even have to invite us. We just jump into the car and they drive off, and only then do we ask them, well, who are you, where are you going? When you develop the breath as a foundation, you've got a good spot to stand on the side of the road. You feel comfortable, you feel secure. If someone comes driving up and offers you a ride, you can ask, well, who are you? Where are you taking us? And you can look at it and you can see, is this person driving the car someone you can trust or not, even though they say they may be taking you to a good place. Look in the eye and see, oh, that's greed talking, that's aversion talking, that's delusion talking. I don't need to go with that person. And in this way you learn how to pull yourself out of what they call the defilements of the mind, the things that obscure your awareness, that obscure your clarity, obscure your insight, and obscure the calm of the mind. So working with emotions in this way is not just for the sake of learning how to live a more comfortable life. You dig deeper and deeper into the processes that have been driving your life, so that you can live in a way that's more skillful. So these are some of the uses that come from learning how to develop the process of working with the breath proactively and playing with the breath proactively to help solve some of the problems of the mind. The homework for this week is to think of an issue in life that you would like an answer to. Pose it before you go into meditation, and then see what answers you get when you come out. Some answers may come bubbling up immediately as you leave concentration. Others may not, but at least you're in a better position to start using the powers of concentration to approach some of the issues that you face in day-to-day life, both within the mind and in issues outside, and seeing what kind of results you get.